I'm doing my dance. We are live at 7 o'clock. Tonight, we're going to talk about a couple things. One, first of all, and we'll wait till everybody gets here so that I can tell you that obviously I'm going to be on the on the sloppy live deal with Matt, which will be cool. That'll be Saturday night, and I've been told to make sure that I bring snacks and drinks and hydrate because it tends to go long, which will be awesome. I know that when we did the one with Uncle Tony, that we were on there for more than 3 hours. So it was quite a long time. And I think Matt and I probably have even more to talk about. So that will be fun. Also, hopefully you guys have taken a look at the video that I posted today on cam stuff. And it doesn't really matter. I mean, this particular test was on 2 different small block Chevys, but really they could be 2 small block Fords or, small block Dodges or LSs or whatever. It doesn't matter because the motors don't care. The point is that when we're doing cam testing, and a lot of people still out there, I get comments all the time, they think that there's magic cam timing. They think that Joe Schmo's super double throwdown cams are better than this guy's cams, despite the fact that they share really, really similar cam specs, that somehow this guy's like magic stuff is the magic stuff, and the other one doesn't have nearly the magic stuff that this one has. And so somehow that those are going to be different, despite the fact that if I've shown you time and time again on the channel that when we run cams and we run a 224, 227, 231 cam, that this is kind of what they do. So it doesn't matter that it's a Brian Tooley cam or a Comp Cam or Guatney or whoever else's cam. And I know that there are different valve events that can adjust that. But the reality is that camshafts don't care whose name's on it. They care about the valve events, what you're doing. And that there's nobody left like, nobody with a 224 cam, a decent 224 cam, and somebody else that has a 224 cam, nobody left 30 horsepower on the table. If they both have 224 degrees of intake duration, and you have some kind of somebody that knows what they're doing, it's a 224, 232 kind of cam, and it's near 600 lift, and it's a 111 or 112 degree lobe separation angle. There's no amount of like magic valve events that are going to make one of those 224 cams 30 horsepower better. There is something that you can do to make one of those cams 30 horsepower less. that actually can be done. You have to screw it up pretty badly, but that can be done. But there's not like I said, there's not an extra 30 just laying around that lots and lots of smart guys, much smarter than me, have left on the table. There's been lots of guys that have applied their knowledge and understanding, and hopefully testing as well, because you can't just do this on a spreadsheet. I don't care who you are. You have to test it, and they didn't just leave that on the table. So that's not a thing. But what I wanted to talk about in the video that I did today, and what we're going to talk about here tonight, is that when you run camshafts, when you test them, the kind of power gains that you get from them, one is going to be based on what cam you test. Like if we test a Brian Tooley torque cam or Tech-Sbc torque cam or truck cam or whatever, and then we test a sloppy stage 2 or a 231, 247 kind of cam, like that 469 cam, and that could be anybody's cam. Again, it doesn't matter whose that is. But if we were to, one of those cams is going to make less power and kind of a different power curve than the other cam. But the other thing that's going to affect that is if we run that cam test if we put it in LS terminology, if we run that cam test on a 4.8, the results are going to be different than if we run that cam test on a 6-liter or 6.2 or a 7-liter or 408, that kind of thing. And that's what we showed in the small block Chevy test. We ran a very, very popular comp cam on 2 different 350s. One of them was actually a 355. The other one was a junkyard motor. One of them was fairly mild. One of them was a little bit less mild. Both of them were what I would call middle of the road. Neither one of them were like extremely high horsepower deals. And we talk about that in the video, that had I tested this on a stock motor, a 2-barrel stock motor, the gains would be very insignificant from the same cam. If we tested them on a 383 with really good heads and more compression, and it has more displacement and more intake manifold and a bigger carburetor, the gains would be even more. As it was, if you guys haven't seen the video, here's a little spoiler alert, but we got as much as 95 horsepower from this very mild cam. It's a 224, 230 cam. an Extreme Energy 268 hydraulic flat tappet cam. Even though the first motor that I ran it in was actually a Vortec hydraulic roller motor, we ran a flat tappet cam in it because I specifically wanted to test the flat tappet cam. It was easy to put in. So all of that worked out really well, but on the milder motor, we got a 65 horsepower gain, which is still really good, but admittedly, we're comparing it to a very, very mild stock, like truck style cam is one that I got from a local auto parts store. So it was basically a replacement cam because I didn't even have the replacement cam on the flat tappet one. And I did this test originally, like I did the Vortec motor after I did the other one. So we needed a baseline cam for the flat tappet block. So I got one of those from the local auto parts store. And then I ended up keeping that cam and those lifters. And then we tried it in the Vortec motor too, and it worked out just fine. So but the point is that on a milder application, that same cam picked up about 65 horsepower, which is nothing to sneeze at. But again, we started fairly low on the totem pole in terms of camshaft. So it was a good gain and the motor made decent power. And we did what we expected it to do with stock Vortec heads and the dual plane intake manifold. And then we tested on a motor that was a 355. It had flat top pistons on it. It had Holley aluminum heads, which admittedly are kind of middle of the road, or they were. I don't think they're available anymore, but the Holley Systemax small block Chevy heads were more middle of the road kind of head. They're not Airflow Research CNC heads or a Trick Flow CNC head or Brodex or a Dart or any of those upper echelon heads. They were more middle of the road, more like you'd see an Ascast, maybe a Chinese head, kind of that kind of thing. Better probably than a Vortec head, but not as good as those other things. But still, they were a little bit better. So it had more compression, it had a little more displacement. It had a good intake manifold, probably better of the two. The one that I ran on the Vortec headed one was from the guys at Speedmaster, and the other one was a conventional small block head, a non-Vortec one, but it was an RPM air gap, and that's kind of the gold standard of the dual plane intake manifolds. And we ran back then we had run a Demon 650 Mighty Demon on that combination and had good headers on it and stuff. And so when we ran on that, on the mild combination, we picked up about 65 horsepower. And on the wilder combination, the gains were 95 horsepower. That's measured peak to peak. We actually had bigger gains than that at the top of the RPM range, where the stock cam would be falling off a lot, and then where the other cam would not be falling off a lot. So that's kind of an artificial thing. But we saw good gains. And again, if you compare that to a big block Chevy, if we run a stock cam and then put a mild cam in it, and the motor's mostly stock, we're going to get some kind of gain. And if that motor has, instead of a 454, if it's a 468 or a 496 and has better heads, basically it's kind of like an LS. It has everything else that it needs except for the camshaft. And that's why we get such big gains from camshafts in LSs. Although, like I said before, the gain that you get from a camshaft in a 4.8 is not as much as we get from a 5.3 or a 6.0 or a 6.2 or a 7-liter. So that's all good things to consider. So when you guys are making mods, know that, oh, this cam didn't add any power. Well, it didn't add any power because you had a 2-barrel intake manifold on there probably, and it would gain a lot more if you have a good induction system and yada, yada, yada. So just so I'm sure that all the guys that are watching this probably already know most of that anyway. But if you're new and you're just starting out, please know that the gains that you're going to get from any modification, in addition to being how good that modification is, it's also going to be determined by the thing that you tested on, because that's very important. So let's see what you guys have going on. And again, now that more people are here, make sure that you watch the thing with Matt and I on the Sloppy Radio Show. That's going to be on Saturday night. That'll be a lot of fun. It'll be very long, so we'll have plenty of time to answer questions. I'm sure that they're going to ask questions about how I got in the industry and all of those things, so we can talk about a lot of cool stuff. I've got a lot of good racing stories that I've never told before. There's an unlimited amount of those. Sometimes I just don't even remember them. And then sometimes somebody will be talking about something and it'll trigger that memory, and I'll go down that path and go, oh yeah, that's right. We did do that. And it was, it was silly, or it was dumb, or we almost caught ourselves on fire, or whatever things happen. So that will be interesting. It'll be good to talk to Matt too, because I haven't spoke with him at length on the phone. We've spoken a few times. And he's a good guy to talk to. He's real knowledgeable because he does different things than I do. And I like talking to people like that have, we all go in our lives, we go down different paths and learn different things. Nobody learns everything. Guys that think that they know everything are usually young and and haven't learned yet that they haven't learned everything. But I like talking to people that have a different point of view and a different learning curve and a different avenue that they went down. And it'll be cool to talk to him because I've got some questions for some LS stuff and all kinds of things that I don't have answers to. And I'm hoping that he might. Demon Tech, what are you doing? Just tuned in and driving home from class. What class are you driving home from? So let's get to some questions. I won't go all the way back. Some cams are made by Elgin. Okay, that's cool. I didn't know that. I want to see some stupid Engine Masters type cams that have like 98 to 104 degree LSA versus off the shelf grinds. Well, you know where you see Engine Masters type cams. I was going to say, you know where you see those cams is in Engine Masters Challenge competitions, because if you tighten up the LSA, you can pick up a lot of like average power production. That's what I did on my motor when I was running Engine Masters. I think we got down to 108 or 107 or something on the cams that I was testing. They were TK series roller deals. And again, it's not that was ideal for it. Wouldn't they're trying to pretend that those Engine Master motors were street motors, but they weren't. You know, these really, really tiny ring packs and these roller cams and stuff. And that they were just really designed to be doing what they were doing. And that's what most motors are. A drag race motor is different than an endurance motor and different than a sprint car motor and then a NASCAR motor and the drift motor. All of that stuff is kind of specialized, especially if you're going to excel at that particular thing. It has to be really good at doing that. And the same thing with the Engine Masters motors is they have to be really good at producing that average power number that you're trying to produce. When we were doing it, I think we were going from 3,000 to 7,000, and they might even be, and they've changed that around from year to year. So this is way back. We had 410-inch motors, and then you had to have the most average power production in that range. So that's not something that guys normally do. Like I chose a dual plane manifold. We ported the heck out of it and did all kinds of tricks things to it. But because you're trying to just get that average number up, that's all you care about. I didn't care what the peak number was. I didn't care about peak torque. I didn't care about peak horsepower. All we did was keep looking at whatever the average number was and things that we could do to change the average number. A lot of times when we were doing it, we would just go like this and we would just rock the curve and the average number would be the same. Even though we're changing the peak horsepower by 20 horsepower, we're also affecting the low speed torque, usually below the torque peak, by that same kind of amount to get either a net loss or a tiny net gain, or sometimes nothing at all. Sometimes it was exactly the same, which is really frustrating after about 300 or 400 runs on that dyno or on that particular test motor. So but it was fun. That's why you do it. Richard, are you going to Cleveland Cars in Indy in May? No, I don't normally go to events like that. Most of my stuff is just on the dyno. Dual pattern versus single pattern cams, what's your pick? I like dual pattern cams. I've yet to run a single pattern cam that did as well as a dual pattern cam for kind of a performance application. The one area where I can see single pattern stuff is if you're trying to make like the torque cam that Brian Tooley has. It's a single pattern cam. It works really well down low. Prepare plenty of hydration. I plan to be well hydrated. I'm waiting for the engine to cool down following an idle or pulley failure. Uh-oh. Did it make noise, Ben, before it checked out? Jerry, is a single pattern 237. Is that an LS cam or what cam is that? Because a 237 with a 104, 112, so it's going to be 108. Would that even fit an LS? Every cam is a nitrous cam. They are, and it's not too much overlap for boost. It's not. That's not what's going wrong. Ballpark Cam Specs, 9,000 RPM, 302 forward hydraulic roller, naturally aspirated 20216 AFR 185s. And do you want it to make power at 9,000? Because if you want to make power at 9,000, 185 airflow is not going to be nearly enough head for doing that. And I'm not the guy to talk to about a 9,000 RPM 302. I've never built one. We did an 8,000 RPM, but I would imagine you're going to be up in the 270 or 280 at 50 range. Yeah, Tim is kind of chiming in on the same thing there. Bam Bam, your home renovator. What's up? Hi, Rich. I bought a bare set of Chinese small block Chevy eBay heads. I noticed that the intake valve is not lined up with the push rod. How do you run them? Offset rocker or standard? Adjustable guide plate or standard? We do use adjustable guide plates, and we've had to do that with big block Chevys sometimes, and we've had to do that with small block Chevys and Fords as well. Sometimes we cut the plate and you move it, and then we weld another bridge basically from the plate. There, for small block Chevys, there are adjustable plates. They have a little sliding mechanism, like a little overlap here like this, and you can do that to get the. What you're trying to do is to make sure that the push rod doesn't hit anywhere in the hole, and also make sure that the rocker tip is centered as well as it can be on the valve tip. So make sure that that's happening, and then tack it in place. Or sometimes you can just tighten the thing down in place, and it will work just fine. The Ozman, I want to build. Great stuff. What do you want to build, Ozman? Let's see, Brandon, have you ever had a 4853 block sonic check for 4.0? No, but I want to. I'm thinking that I thought that I had one checked by the guys at L&R down in Santa Fe Springs, and I thought that he told me that it was kind of thin. I was thinking that he told me that it was like 160 thousandths, the one that we checked, and I thought that that wasn't enough. So let me know what you guys think about that. How come a lot of the cams you run are 112 to 116 or more LSE instead of 106 to 110? The cams that I run that I test are normally either stock LS cams, or if you're talking about LS cams, they're either stock or they're off-the-shelf cams, and that's kind of what they are. If we wanted to make more power and it was an NA motor, we could tighten that up. The other problem with the much tighter LSA, like you're talking about 106, is that you start trading piston to valve clearance. And if you have a piston that has valve reliefs in it, then we can get away with that. But most of the stuff that I run they're junkyard small blocks, junkyard 4.8 or 5.3 or 6.0. And that when you start tightening up the LSA, it really takes away piston to valve clearance. $8,500 RPM on factory heads are all short track racers do. On short track, they run factory heads. But there's no way that on any factory head that a motor's making power at 8,500 RPM. So I found the lifters I need. I just need an optimum cam grind. Custom tri-Y headers and ITB intake should help with down low in the mid-range, but I need the high RPM torque. What is it you're building? So you want to go, so you want a 9,000 RPM 302. It has to go 50,000 miles without a single adjustment. It can be categorized as a street strip motor. And I need an optimum can grind. You're going to run a tri-Y header and an ITB intake to help with the low and mid range, but I need high RPM peak power. I think getting all of that is going to be really, really tough. The Ozman, you want to build a 350 or any LS? Brian wants a good ring grinding tool. Well, that can go anywhere from just a simple hand file to, I've seen guys use Whizzy wheels. You got to be really careful about that. I've gone from, oh, not enough to way too much on a Whizzy wheel before. But we use the one from the guys at Total Seal. I'm sure that it's fairly expensive, and there probably are lower cost alternatives to that, but I really like that one because it has a dial indicator, and if I go in and I want 10 thousandths off, I can go in and use the dial indicator and take 10 thousandths off. It does a pretty good job of squaring the ring up, so you're not cutting it at an angle, you're cutting it pretty square to the face. So I really like that, and it makes doing rings like instead of something to dread, I kind of like doing it because it's so fast with the grinder. Yeah, I figured 200 wall thickness was kind of where I was thinking would be good. I probably would run it even at 160 just for the dyno. And if it blew up, it was just a junkyard motor anyway. Admiral's back. Richard's here. Thoughts on big torque, big block Chevy, maximum RPM 5,000 for heavy, backed by a 6-speed Allison. Doug, your best bet is to make the thing big. If you want a big block that has lots of low-speed torque at 2,500 or lower, having displacement is the best way to do it. Displacement, compression, lots of runner length, and obviously cam. But cam seems to affect it the least of those 3 things or 4 things. Only 17 minutes late, Mike. Way to go. Will shaft mount adjustable roller rockers sold as LS1, LS6 fit an A62? Yes, they will. The bolt pattern for all of that is the same. I've never done a draw through versus a blow through versus a draw through turbo. I've never done that. A 195 is not enough head to, you need like a 225 or 235 or 245 head to make power at 9,000 RPM. And you're not going to be able to have the thing make, especially with a 302, you're not going to be able to have it make unless you have a variable runner and variable cam. It's not going to make a lot of low speed power and a lot of mid range and a lot of top end. You're going to have to pick one of those. Yeah, for 9,000 RPM, you'd be better off just buying an old cup motor. Robert, what do you think of a 350 flat top, 4-valve release, 461 heads, 202? That's kind of an OG combination there. 262, 68 cam with 1.6 rockers. That will work. It's not going to make a ton of power because a 461 head's not that great. And if you were going to run a 461 head, most guys would go with more camshaft than that. But I don't know what you want to do with that. If you're just looking to drive it around and stuff, then that's going to be a good combination. Unless you're talking about a 262, 268 at 50 cam, then that's a real cam. Let's see. John, what's up? Thank you very much. The small but Chevy 350 that came out of an 81 C3 Corvette is 97,000 miles on it. Burned no oil. Perfect. Is it an 81? Is it an L48 or is it an L82? I want to pull apart and ball hone it and install aluminum heads and performance cam. I see you pull junkyard engines and test them. Yeah, we do it all the time. And if you take a look up on the channel, I did an L82 upgrade where we did basically that. So we took the L82 and took off I think the L82 had 882 heads on it. So we took those off and put a set of aluminum RHS heads, which were too big, but there's lots of good small block Chevy heads, cheap ones. The Pro Max stuff and probably the Skip White stuff works. I've never tested them, but I'm assuming that they do. There's lots of good stuff out there. So put a decent set of aluminum heads on it, a performance camshaft that's going to give you the RPM range that you want to run. Obviously, have good springs on it, a dual plane intake, a carburetor, headers, and you're going to be good to go. Fitting the headers in the Corvette might be a little bit of a problem. Yeah, Tim, the short track guys, he's talking about using stock heads, use the RPM, use gearing. They're not really, the motor's not making power at 8,500. What cam would you recommend for a supercharged 9957 C5 on the street? I have tri-Y headers and X. What kind of supercharger is it? Although I would still recommend a naturally aspirated cam for that. It's a 5.7 C5, so it's an LS1. And if it's supercharged, I think something like the 459, the Comp 459 cam would work really well, or even something smaller than that. Like if you look up a Comp 54-454-11 camshaft, something like that. There are other versions of it. Brian Tooley has plenty of stuff, but something like a 227, 243 is going to work pretty well. Someone summarized everything that Richard's talking about from the very beginning. We talked about camshafts. I put up a video today on small blocks. We did cams. We did cams on 2 different motors, and we made dramatically different power gains from those 2 because those 2 combinations started out being different. So we were just talking about cams having different effects based on not just the cam, but also on the combination that you're tested on. You're all caught up and you're ready to go. Cheap alternative for a ring grinder tool is a Harbor Freight mini bench grinder. That works good. Yeah, Tom, if you look at, he's saying low lift and lots of duration, take a look at a Duntov 3030 cam. Take a look at any of the performance, 60s and early 70s small block Chevy cams, especially the 60s stuff. That's what they did. They had no lift hardly at all, but they had lots of duration. I think that the one of the Duntov cams was like a 246, 254 at 50. It's a lot of camshaft from a factory cam. It only had like 450 or 460 lift or something, or maybe it was 480, but that's a lot of duration. Mark wants to know why we see less exhaust duration than intake duration on 4-valve motors. I'm just assuming, and I've run them both ways because we've run lots of Honda stuff with more exhaust duration, and I haven't done a dedicated test to find out actually which way is better there. Usually it has to do with the exhaust flowing pretty well on 4-valve motors. And again, I've had people tell me that on 2-valve motors, on conventional like small block and big block heads, and they say, oh no, when you get the exhaust flowing up around 75 or 80% of the intake, then you got to run a single pattern cam. But I have, nobody's yet shown me where that actually works. When using stock exhaust manifolds, do you recommend a lot of extra duration? I don't think you can cam past stock exhaust manifolds. Yeah, it gets tough to do draw through turbo stuff because the turbo has to have a carbon seal. It's got to be set up for that. The other thing that happens is turbos usually tend not to last as long on a draw through application. Having liquid come in contact with the really, really fast spinning impeller. I know that liquid is, we can obviously dive into water, but it tends to make the impellers not last as long. Dirty Boys here. Why are cams so much for Gen 2 small block and LS cams are so much cheaper? I think that the Gen 2 cams are fairly specialized, right? Don't they have a weird snout on them or something? I know that you can upgrade Gen 2 if you're not using the OptiSpark, and then you can just use any of the regular small blocks. I take not any of the small blocks, but any of the like TunePort small block ones, any of the factory hydraulic roller stuff. Need help selecting a hydraulic roller cam, 393, 4-speed, 491 gear. Terry, take a look at the 408 test that I did. That video is up, and I ran 2 different camshafts in that. So you can get a pretty good idea. One of them is pretty aggressive. So if you're wanting to, race it around, you have something, and one of them is smaller than that. So take a look at those 2 cams. And then if you don't like, if one of them is too mild and one of them is too wild, pick something that's going to kind of be in between those 2, and that should give you a pretty good idea. What's the maximum displacement for a junkyard Gen 6 454? We normally go to 496, and that's what most people run. When you start going with more stroke on those things, which I've seen some people try to do, start getting into windage issues. Christian, yeah, the short track guys have valve relief so they can run a really tight LSA because they're trying to make good average power, and that tends to do that. I don't think I've never run a tick performance cam for an LT1. So you want a high revving hydraulic 302. So we've gone to 8,000 with a hydraulic roller 302. But I don't know why you need 99,000 RPM. I don't know how much power you're trying to make. A Cannonball Run motor doesn't need to be a 9,000 RPM motor. It doesn't need to be anywhere near that. Best or biggest cam for an 88 5-liter. I like that because I have one of those. E7 heads, 650 double pump stealth intake. Is anything done to the heads? Because that's definitely going to be your limiting factor. You can keep stuffing camshaft in it, and it's not going to work very well because you just don't have enough cylinder head to support it. Okay, Kevin, you can run those out. You can you can bore it out as far as you want and run as much compression as you want and run as thin a wall as you want. And if your buddy's never had any problems, and you then try it and let us know. Tom Mills is it? Kevin, what's up? A small block Chevy 5.7 swamp cam working. Is it worth looking into? Some guys do it. The reason that the factory wants to do it and the reason that the LS firing order is different is not because it makes more power. It's because it changes the harmonics in the motor. It changes the power pulses. So it's a vibration issue and a resonance like strength issue. It's not because that is a magic swap that makes more power. I think that Brule and Freiberger did a 5.7 swap test, and I don't think it was worth any power. Tom has a 235, 243, 600, 109 plus 4, 94, 5.7 LT1 6-speed. Makes great power but drivability. 235 is a pretty good sized cam, Tom. So 235, 243 is pretty big for an LT1, unless like if that was bigger, if that was a 383, that would be really nice, or 396, which they do out of those also. If it has a stock head, that's a pretty good amount of cam for a stock head. Yeah, 9,000 is easy without maintenance. It's a Honda B16. I never even ran my B16 to 9,000. Yeah, Brian, for low boost factory applications. But I don't think that the oh no, they did, huh? Let's see. Yeah, for low boost, it probably was fine. And if you're talking about, and also the other thing I was trying to think about, I was lost in thought there for a minute, is that when you have a draw through application, the carburetor itself becomes a restriction. On a blow through application, the carburetor is not a restriction, because even if you had a 650 carburetor, which as you were drawing through it, a 650 only breathes so much. Think about putting a 650 on like a 500 or 600 inch motor, it would be a restriction. But if you're pressurizing, now the flow rate of that 650 or 750 or 850 goes up dramatically. So now you can, for instance, you can make way over 1,000 horsepower with a blow through 750, but you wouldn't be able to make 1,000 horsepower with a draw through 750. It'd be much more difficult. Charles, I think I did a low dollar turbo test video. So take a look up on the channel, and I compared a 7875 Gen 2 to a GT. You're looking at a GT 3582. 600 wheel horsepower is probably not going to happen with that turbo. A GT 45 you can get 600 wheel horsepower from. So, but I did a comparison between the 7875 and a GT 45, and you can see what the response rate is on both of those. And we did it on a 4.8. So your response rate would be even better on the 5.3. I know, where's all the likes? We got likes going up now. We got 90, so we're doing okay. But you know, it's still only like it's less than 50%. Hey Richard, every test I see with the big block Chevy tunnel rims are worth 50 to 60 horsepower. It's not always that much, but it can be. And the tunnel ram usually is quite a bit better than the dual plane, certainly than a single plane on the big blocks. They like it. Draw through is cool because it's cheap intercooler. The blow through also is an intercooler. So they both get the fuel delivered to the motor to do the cooling. So the draw through has a little bit more time for that to happen. One RV cam not scoff at stock exhaust manifolds. Think of the stock exhaust manifolds as a restriction for whatever you have. So if you have a motor that makes 300 horsepower and you have stock and you take the headers off and put stock exhaust manifolds on it, they're not going to restrict it that much because they'll actually flow fairly well for that power output. If you do it on a 400 horsepower motor, the stock exhaust manifolds are going to restrict it a little bit more. And if you do it on a 500 horsepower motor, they're going to restrict it even more. So think about it that way and don't think about the cam versus stock exhaust manifolds. Think of that as just kind of a restriction. Skip White motor, not a Skip White motor, a Skip White heads though. He does low dollar aluminum small block Chevy heads. Sonic wave is the reason for dual pattern. $4,200 powers in the house. No reverse. Have you had rust spots in LS cylinders and what did you do about it? Well, what we did was just ball hone it and run it. If you take a look at I think it was, now I don't remember because it's been so long, but it was either the 4.8 or the 5.3 Big Bang had a big rust spot on one of the cylinders and we just ran it anyways because, you know, we were trying to blow it up. But it had very little or no blow by even at 35 thousandths ring gap. Sometimes on those, I won't even take them apart and hone them. I'll just scuff them with WD-40 and Scotch-Brite and stuff. And if I can get it out and get the piston going up and down, then we just run it. Plate should be there by next Friday. Okay, cool. Any idea how much the Cass GT3530? I don't know what a 3538 is. I'm thinking you're wanting to say GT3582, but a GT3582 is about a 500 or 550 horsepower flywheel motor or flywheel turbo. You might get 600 out of it, but it would have to be. You're not going to do that probably on a big motor. You'd be more apt to do that on a small Honda motor. So it's a small turbo. A GT45, the cheap eBay one that we get for everything, is a much better choice for 600 or 700 horsepower. Can you use solid roller lifters instead of the original hydraulic rollers? Yes, you can. You got to change the push rod length too, but RPM equals ruins people's motors. I've never heard that before. That's kind of clever. Maybe that should be on a shirt, right? Would it be advantageous to have 90% plus exhaust flow of the intake? Only if that meant, only if it didn't mean that the intake flow was really bad. Usually, most people, and by most people, I'm thinking about pro stock guys, they don't even care about the exhaust flow. They care about having the biggest intake valve and the biggest intake port, and the exhaust will find its way out, is kind of their attitude. If you look at what their heads do, they have made their head so that they can put the biggest, they've moved the exhaust so that they can have the biggest exhaust or intake valve that they can. So they're much less concerned about that intake to exhaust flow relationship. Bell housing adapter is on its way for the 4200. And put 72 horsepower to the wheels from an 87 5-liter with an E303 cam. It seems a little low.
So this is a good question for you guys, and Tom mentioned this. Matt, he's saying to match the lift to the head flow and run the duration for the desired operating range, and determine LSA based on intake and exhaust restrictions. So the thought is that if you, for instance, if you have a cylinder head that makes peak flow at 600 lift, that you don't run more than a 600 lift cam. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think that that's true? Do you think that that's how you should choose your camshaft, is based on the maximum flow point of the cylinder head? Let me know what you guys think. Tim, you think that a cast China GT3582 will flow 67 pounds a minute? We've seen them be about 500 wheel horsepower when we test them. Yeah, Rick, that's what I thought. I remember talking to Brule about that, and I've run altered firing order camshafts, but not compared them to something else. We had one that I put in that we called the Magic Cam. It was for a big block, and I'd run it on a 540 Dart SHP big block that I had, and we ran all kinds of stuff with it. We ran it NA, we ran it with nitrous, we ran it with blower, we ran it with turbo, we ran all kinds of stuff with it, and it worked on everything. And it was a fairly good size cam. It was like a 275, 282. It was a 4.7 swap cam, and I think lift was kind of like about the size cam that I ran in that big block Ford. It was like mid 700 lift. I'd have to go look at the specs exactly, but that cam seemed to work on everything. And the funny thing about it is nobody spec'd the cam. Like, I didn't talk to Brule about it. I didn't choose it. It happened to be a cam that we had laying around up at West Tech, because they had a few comp cams up there, and I'm like, I just need a big block. I need a kind of big block cam. So I was looking for something that was a 270 plus, 280 plus kind of thing. Anything that would go in there. That's all I cared about. And we found this cam. I'm like, hey, look, this will work. And Steve goes, yeah, that's going to be a winner. That's going to work really well. Meaning that it would go in and the motor would start and all that stuff would work. And little did we know, like I said, we ran it with everything, and it worked fantastic. We ran it with a tunnel ram, we ran it with a single carburetor, we ran it with, I think that motor had Dart 335 Pro 1 CNC heads on it, and it worked really good. And with the tunnel ram and stuff, and even though that thing was a flat top motor and had about like 8-to-1 compression, we got the thing to make like 820 or something with a tunnel ram on it. It did pretty well. ZZ4 cam should work pretty well. And a 406 it might not be quite enough cam for the 406, but it would, okay, if it's in a half-ton daily driver 4-speed pickup, that'll work good. Gen 1 327, Pro Max 183 head, 64 ccc, stock piston, stock head gasket, installed a 218 480 lift. It's a 70 C10 two-wheel drive with a 704. Jason, it's going to be a little bit better on a 327. It's going to be a fairly mild cam. Like, if you look at the camshaft that I put up in the video, it was a 224 230. And it didn't seem to lose anything compared to the stock cam down at, and I think that our starting point on that was about 3,000 RPM. So that thing might be a little bit better, down low. Parker, I don't know. I don't know exactly on that. I thought that they were the same, but I've also been told that the retrofit hydraulic roller cams were also a small base circle on the Fords. So if somebody knows, somebody correct me. I wish Billy was here. He could let me know for sure. Well, Brian, we recently did some tests on, he wants to know what lift does, and it's hard to isolate one thing, and you're isolating things there in your description, that duration maps the rev range and LSA effects overlap.
LSA also affects rev range. They're all kind of interrelated. The lift, I don't think you can isolate that. But I can tell you on some tests, changing the lift from, we were doing truck cams, changing the lift from sub 500 lift, which we would run with a stock valve spring, to 530, 540, 550 lift, had very little change in power, with everything else being the same. And by that, I mean less than 10 horsepower difference between a 50 thousandths lift change with no change in duration. Normally, those things kind of go up together, but sometimes they don't. Like we've talked about the small block Chevy cams that are 480 lift, but 254 degrees of duration at 50. Tom, what do you want to know about base circles? The reason that a lot of times we want to change base circles, especially like on stroker Chevys, they're really bad, because that way you can fit, like the rod doesn't come up and hit the camshaft. John was busy being awesome. Nice. 6-inch connecting rod, 10-to-1, 355. Urson hydraulic cam, 230, 238, 584, 1.6 rocker. Should I use AFR eliminator 195 or 210? If you're wanting to go to a 400 later, then pick the bigger head. You're not going to lose anything putting a 210 on that motor. Take a look at the test that I did. I think I did a small block version of that as well, where we ran a few different size heads on the small block. I know they did it on a Ford, and you just don't see much of a change. I'm running an E303 cam on an 87 5-liter E7 heads with bone stock valve springs and retainers to 6200. Yeah, I don't see that. Having a little bit of experience with an 88 5-liter, you might not be feeling valve float with a stock valve spring, but it will be floating. Have you ever flow tested the Brodux IK200 head? I'd have to look and see. I don't think so. Although probably if you look up Jeff Smith or Henry from the Super Chevy, probably did that though. Sergeant Friday, do you do much with big cube small blocks? Like how big? The biggest one I've ever done is a 427, but not bigger than that. Some of the trophy truck guys that come into West Tech, they're running on the chassis dyno are bigger than that, but that's all usually altered bore spacing stuff. Will you ever do a voodoo test? Daniel, thank you very much, but probably not. That's such a specialized motor and it's very, very expensive. And I doubt that. I mean, we've run them on the chassis dyno before, and I think I was there when Kenny Bell put they may have put a blower on one of those, but that would be it. I've never run one on the dyno. I've only ever run one that I can remember, one Coyote, and that was a first gen one way back in like 2010, 2011. The Voodoo is the flat plane crank. Any good cam suggestions for a 355 small block with a 144 blower? Just treat the small block like it was naturally aspirated and then add boost to it. I have some blower stuff up with, I don't think we used a 144. I think we used a 174, but on a small block Ford, but it was a 327 or 331 inch stroker. Take a look at that. I did step-by-step stuff with different heads and different cams and things like that. And you can kind of see everything that we did to improve the power output naturally aspirated helps with the blower. It brings the boost down. So something like the cam that I put in the test that I did today, that 268 cam, or even something one step up from that would also work with the blower.
the blower is gonna kind of determine the power anyway. A 144 is a little bit small, but it will be fun. Oh, does he mean the Voodoo cams? Maybe, I don't know. Were you, Daniel, were you talking about the Voodoo cams, or were you talking about the flat plane crank Coyote 5-liter deal, or 5.2 liter? I'll try to answer the other one too, if you can let me know what you're talking about. Please confirm that thumper style cams are for sound and not power. Somebody asked me about that today, and honestly, I've not tested one. I don't remember ever running one of the thumper cams. Daniel, you got to let me know what you're talking about. Are you talking about the 5-liter Coyote or 5.2 Coyote motor with a flat plane crank, or are you talking about Voodoo, the Lunati Voodoo line of camshafts? Yeah, Tom, I haven't run those. I know that I was talking to Billy about those, and they originally designed the thumper style cams for sound, but I think that they also make power. Has anybody ever run one of these thumper cams? Once the plate is there, is the 4200 up next? I don't know. We have to look and see what the dyno schedule is. And also, I'm flying off to see Brian Tooley pretty soon too. So, Daniel, did you answer me yet? The thing that I kind of like about the thumper cam is they have a lot of exhaust duration relative to their intake duration. So they're a lot like the cams that Daniel, don't keep spending money. Just ask a regular question. It's appreciated, but you don't need to do that to ask a question. Just ask a question in a normal chat. The cams that the Chevy Racing does for their Copo Camaros are like that. They have lots of exhaust duration relative to their intake duration. So it's that's pretty cool, but I've not run one of those. Oh, so it is the 5.2 Coyote deal. We've only run those on the chassis dyno. They're kind of cool, but they're very high, so boost is not normally a thing that guys do except for low boost stuff. And I don't know if I've seen anybody take those apart and change the pistons in them to be able to run boost on them. I tell you, Ford really struggled with the vibration in those motors, and not surprisingly so. It's really hard to do with a flat plane crank. I know. I have one of a flat plane crank car in my garage, and they have to isolate the motor with hydraulic motor mounts, all kinds of stuff to get the vibration out of the rest of the chassis. And they struggled for a long time. They struggled with the release of that to get it right before they actually offered it to the public. And I don't think that they're doing it anymore for that reason. Once you hit peak flow, there's no sense in going bigger on the cam. And see, I know, Mark, I know Vizard says that, but I think that that's 100% wrong. I know that you'll make more power if you take an LS head and the peak flow peaks at 600 lift and remains static at 650, and you put more camshaft in it, it will make more power. What determines the amount of vacuum a cam makes at idle? Lots of things. The lobe separation angle, the overlap, all kinds of cool things. What flat plane crank car do you have? I'll give you a hint. It's red. It's bright red. Yeah, the 5.2 is pretty large for a flat plane crank. Mine's only 3.5 liters. A friend of mine ran one in his 57 Chevy and a 383 and ran high 12s all day on street tires. Is that Carl Jr.? Are you talking about you must be talking about the Mother Thumper cams or the Thumper cams? No, a 458 would be a 4.5 liter motor. Yeah, the Thumper cams. Like I said, they have enough specs to where they should make power. I don't, philosophically, for me, I don't like the idea of buying a cam just for sound, which is why it just blew me away that people were so like enthusiastic and crazy about like idle clips. Everybody wanted idle. Did you do an idle clip when you had it on the dyno? I'm like, I don't even tune for idle. I didn't even care about that. And as long as the thing idles at 1500 or whatever and doesn't die when I let off the throttle, that's all that I care about. But everybody loves that idle clip thing. Frank, how's the progress on the 4200? Well, Mark just sent out the bell housing adapter so that we can put it on the dyno. So as soon as that gets there, we should be ready to run it. And we don't know about the K24 is waiting on a ported head. Interesting. Try putting huge exhaust cam on a stock 4200 head and see what happens. So why would you just put an exhaust cam on there? Why wouldn't you do an intake cam on there too? You would want to make both of those work. You ran the middle one, the stage 2 then. Easy. I'm not saying anything bad about the thumper cams. I'm saying that I've never tested one, so I don't know. I don't know what kind of power that they make. Was a Lotus Esprit a flat plane crank? The 4-cylinder one? No, mine's a 355. And the only reason I have that is because I bought it for a price where you couldn't not buy it. And that's why it's sitting in the garage, because I can't even afford to drive it, because if something happens to it, I can't fix it. Even if it gets scratches in the paint, I can't afford to fix the paint or anything, but I couldn't afford not to buy it. So if any of you guys walk outside and if you have any new vehicle, you paid way more for that than I paid for this Ferrari. If you have any car that's 10 years old or less, you paid more for that. If you have a used car that's a project car, you probably paid more than I paid for that. I lucked into this thing because there was an estate sale thing going on, and it's a whole big long story, but that's the only reason I have it. I've always wanted one because I think that they're cool, and I need to just get rid of it basically because I never drive it. It was cool driving my kids to school when they were young in it. It was awesome, but I never drive it, and I need to sell it. But every time I walk out and lift up the cover on, I'm like, oh man, that thing looks really, really good. Plus it has matching luggage. Daniel got one going in an SN95 with a 6R80 TR2 diff and 03 IRS. That'll be a good combination. Mark, just putting an exhaust cam in there is not going to prove that theory. That's not the way that you prove that. You prove that by running a camshaft that has, like I said, that where the lift peaks at some valve lift number, but then you run a camshaft that has more lift than that. And honestly, if I was going to do that, I would also run more duration. Oh, the V8 Lotuses. Yeah, that's right, because they went to the V8 one later on. Kentucky Speed says that the thumper cams have slow ramp rates. Well, that should help stability then, right? Tell the group about when you owned a 4G. I've told that story a lot of times. I had it for several months before I realized I couldn't afford it. What's the biggest cam that would fit in a 1988 Peanut Port 454? I don't know. Piston to valve clearance on those is pretty limited. Probably something in the 236 at 50 range. 347 MAV, being a small block Ford guy. Well, first of all, I'm an engine guy, so, you know, I'm not a small block Ford guy, although I do have a Mustang. I don't know if I've ever tested an Edelbrock Rolling Thunder 351 cam. I don't recognize that name. I did test the Edelbrock 351 like top end package that they had, but I don't know if it had that cam in it. No, that's not the. I don't have a blonde girlfriend that dropped out of college to work on her modeling career. I have a wonderful, beautiful wife. When are we going to see an Olds 455? I like that. Is it worth restoring a Buick 350? It's worth running it, definitely. Yeah, Jordan, he's the same guy that had those, but also slept on the floor at West Tech for years and years. See, yin and yang. If you went beyond a flow number at some point, when the air get turbulent. So Ira, let me ask you this: if you're and guys that flow test these heads will tell you that, oh well, look, it went turbulent, the sound changed. It does, the sound changed. It does that on a static flow test on a flow bench. But how long while that valve opens and closes past the peak airflow point is the valve at the higher lift point? And you're not as concerned about whatever that peak flow number is at that peak lift point. You're interested in the average. Then do a calculation based on the average flow of that head with that valve going to the higher lift compared to what it was before. It's interesting math stuff. What is a D-stroke SVC 400? Is it SBC, small block Chevy? A D-stroke 400 is not going to be cheaper than a 5.3. I don't see how that's possible. Bill, you've mentioned its duration issue more than lift with stock pistons. The valve lift will affect piston to valve clearance, but lift affects it very little. It's not how far you lift the valve open, because the piston's moving and the valve is moving. It's how long you hang the valve open relative to the moving piston. So the longer you hang the valve open, the more chance you have of it hitting. At some point, it's going to hit. And whether that's 550 lift or 600 lift or 450 lift, is not going to come into play there very much. That has much less of an effect than the duration that you run. Aaron, I don't know which one's better. The Edelbrock top end kit worked very well. Take a look at the video they have up on the 351. The trick flow stuff is really good also. Have you ever watched Formula Off-Road? I'm a crew member for Catlett Turbo. I don't think so. I probably should, though. I have a 55 Olds 324. Okay, I've got a 57 Pontiac 347. So I got, stroker version. Jordan, what topics do you have for the Sloppy Radio Show? You need to go over to see Matt on his post that he made and put questions in there for us to talk about. Just got a TBI 350 short bed Chevy. What's the best to do to her? Save up for a 5.3 swap would be really good in that. Otherwise, I don't know what your emission stuff are, but a throttle body 350 is really not going to make power. You need to get rid of the throttle body injection. It's an airflow limiter and a fuel flow limiter. So if you take that off and put a carbureted dual plane on it, you're going to pick up like 40 or 50 horsepower. It'll be a lot. I have a question about cam bearings and clearance. How loose or how tight before you lose oil pressure? Well, you want them to be just right. You want them to be Goldilocks. Lots of people have different theories about those, and you need to check it. But somewhere in the 2 to 2.5 on the rods and 2.5 or so on the mains. And then a lot of times we'll make the center main on an LS a little bit bigger than that. Ooh, a 429 Cobra Jet block. Nice. Hammer time. Oh, not cam bearing. Did he say a question? Oh, I have a question about cam bearing clearance. I thought he was talking about rod and main bearing clearances. I'm dropping in a new crate LS3 525. I ran Finnegan had one of those and ran that ASI. It comes with the Howard ASA cam. So is it their motor or is it the GM crate motor with the ASA cam? The ASA cam worked pretty well. Do Gen 3 cam bearings seem to fail more than classic small block Chevy cam bearings? I don't think that that's a thing. Have you ever seen jet sprinting boat racing? I have watched that. That's kind of cool. Those guys are racing those things basically in mud puddles. Ryan, if it's a GM crate motor, then that camshaft works pretty well. It's not magic. It's a 226 cam, so it does what it's supposed to do. And I think if you take a look, I think I have a video up on that. We ran Finnegan's motor. It's an LS3 based motor with that ASA cam, and he had a high ram on it with 2 carburetors. And I think it made 570, so it did pretty well. Why did GM change the Gen 3 cam bearing design in 2003? I didn't know that they did. Is there a difference between a Gen 3 cam bearing and a Gen 4 cam bearing? Does it have a different opening or a chamfer or something in it? Daniel, why are you spending so much money? Just ask me the question, man. Do you think that the Voodoo versus an LS7 would be a good shootout on top end video? I don't know what top end video would be. An LS7 is gonna make more power than a 5.2 Coyote is going to, if they're stock. Why is it possible to have too much airspeed in an NA motor? Well, you don't want it to go supersonic. How is power affected by retarding or advancing the cam on a 383 stroker? That's going to depend more on the cam that you're advancing or retarding and what the original specs were on that particular motor. When is Pork Chop going to race me? And I have to tell Troy, there's a steak dinner. I like the spelling of steak too. That's awesome. What's the tightest quench you'd run on aluminum block and head? Well, are you gonna at least have the thickness of the head gasket, like 30 or so? Yeah, Tim's saying that the NASCAR guys run it very tight, and they do. They also run the motors very, very hot, and don't run the motors until they're up to temperature, and they're very finicky, and they've scienced that all out and know exactly what they'll do and what they will get away with. And regular guys don't do that, so I would not suggest doing that. Brian, I don't ever calculate dynamic compression when I'm putting these motors together. Not ever. I mean, I know how to do it, but I don't ever consider that, because dynamic compression isn't the only thing that determines the detonation threshold. There's a lot of other things that affect that. A lot of people put that's one of the problems, is people put stock in one thing. Oh, you got to be focused on the dynamic compression. You have to be focused on the coefficient of discharge where you have to be focused on the port matching the intake to the cylinder head, and it's not that. It's like lots of things. Tom, I've never tested Rhodes lifters. I think I should, though. Jared, just tell me how much power you're trying to make or what RPM you want to run in, or I don't think you told me what the intake manifold is. Brandon, 32 would be more about where I would want to run it. Justin, I have a 2012 Tahoe stock. What should be priority for power? Cam and springs. Is a 2012 is not a Gen 5 yet motor, right? If it's a Gen 4 motor, then I would do cam and springs. Javier, that's probably going to be more a function of tune with the turbo Trans Am. You're going to want to run. What you should do is make sure you have enough fuel getting to the motor. Make sure the timing is right. If you want to put a bigger turbo on it, it's going to become more laggy. Make sure you have a good intercooler, but also make sure you try to run E85 in it. Well, Carl, every 71 Camaro should have Rhodes lifters in it. The old Offie engines had no head gaskets, and neither did a lot of British British motors, I think. Can you give a recommendation for a Gen 4 on a 2012 Tahoe? Well, you got to tell me what Gen 4 is it? Is it a 4.8? Is it a 5.3? Is it a 6.0? And what are you trying to do with it? Is it a daily driver? Is it an NA motor? Is it a turbo motor? Not that that makes any difference. Just tell me what you're trying to do with it. Do you have a tuning library? No, I don't do tunes. I'm not a tuner, Frank. Phony pony. A real question: is it worth stepping up my compression from 11.5 to 1 to 14 to 1? No, only if you want to make more power and you have the octane to work with that compression. Atomic face punch. What do you think about crutching lower static compression with a cam that closes the intake valve earlier? See, this is where guys get into this dynamic compression thing. I don't look at it that way. And we had this discussion in a previous live feed, and this will probably be my last one. I need to get going. If you look at the camshaft as making power, so if you put your camshaft in a motor like we did in the test that I showed today, it makes a certain power curve. It's going to make that power curve regardless of the static compression. The static compression is just going to affect that curve the same way that boost does. So if you run that camshaft, if I was to run that test, either one, that same cam, because we ran the same cam on both motors, if we were to run that on an 8-to-1 motor and then run it on a 10-to-1 motor or an 11-to-1 motor, we would see the same shape curve. The dynamic compression is not going to affect. It's not going to make the cam work better on one than the other. The camshaft is going to do what it does, and it's going to do that irrespective of compression. What is going to happen is that if you have higher compression, your starting point for the cam test is going to be higher, and your finishing point is going to be higher. And because your starting point, like we saw in this test, because your starting point and your finishing point is higher, maybe the number that you get in the middle, the gain that you get, is a little more. That doesn't mean that that cam works better with static compression. It just means you started with a better motor, and that's how I look at it. I don't look at, there are people that actually think that a cam design only works, like you have to have 12-to-1 with that motor. And I'll bet you $1 million that if we take that same camshaft and I put it in an 8-to-1 motor, that it will still work. Yep, Frank, it's just like adding boost. Brian, I think you can convert that carb to your 10 horsepower Briggs just by maybe changing the float bowl and then pressurizing the fuel feed. Yeah, Dylan, I've done testing with fuels like that, and I didn't see any difference. I don't have a Predator carburetor. I haven't even seen one in a really, really long time. I think the only ones I've ever saw were in magazines. 14-to-1 is not too much for E85. Alton, I hope that that's a misprint. 276, 224 cam. 276, 284 maybe. Kevin, the guys at Westec have a 283, an original Fuelie 283, and they're putting that together, so they'll be running that on the dyno, so that will be kind of cool. I mean, if I had a Predator carburetor, we'd stick it on a motor just to see if it works. I'm sure that it does. Guys are running them back in the day. Come on, somebody ask one more question. I'm dancing to the intro music. Somebody out there needs to do a blow-through Predator carburetor, even if they enclose it in a box, in a Predator box. That would be good. A 283 with boost. It's just going to be a 283. The 283, the last one that they ran, I think struggled to make 300 horsepower. Yeah, Bigfoot, yeah, had the Predator carburetor. I think they had dual Predators on there. 274, 224, 50. That would make sense because that's what a 274 extreme energy cam is. Somebody asked about that before. Alexandra, cam considerations for high altitude. I think you should just try to make more power for high altitude. And you can get away with, I think it would probably tighten the LSA up, so get more cylinder pressure. Carl, what's up? Thank you. Thomas, so you de-stroke a 350 to a 331, which is be like a 30 over 327, and you're wanting to get 8,000 to 8,000 RPM with a good hydraulic flat tappet cam. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. You're going to need a solid flat tappet or a solid roller, I think, for that. Matthew, you want to go the other way on the cam timing? For a daily, is there a better option than a sloppy stage 1 cam? That will work. It's just there are cams that will make more power than that. Fascist, it is the last question. Okay, Frank, you get the last question, and unfortunately, it's not going to be a great answer. Is there an equation for finding advertised duration from duration at 50? That's actually going to depend on the ramp rate of the cam. So you could have, there's no absolute number to go from the 50 number to the advertised number. A lot of times the advertised number is even measured at a different point. So, you know, and the ramp rate of the cam can affect that as well. So we were looking at those numbers when I was doing the Engine Master stuff. We were trying to find big numbers at 200 basically. So there's no absolute number. I wish I could tell you one, but there isn't. Thanks guys. Thanks for showing up. I will see you guys tomorrow. Peace.